Russia defeated Ukraine in Bakhmut. I'll keep saying Bakhmut for simplicity, but Russia has defeated Ukraine there. And this is the big news that is being talked about all across the collective West. And it is really big news because this has been over 10 months of fighting. There have been arguably more than 100,000 people alone, personnel, military personnel, a lot of them from the Ukraine side, killed in what Russia has called a meat grinder in Bakhmut. A lot of resources were invested here. The United States and the collective West went through another army to try to take this city, and they failed, right? Russia took it. And this comes as the collective West mulls what to do next. And there's a lot of confusing things I'm sure you've been seeing all across the Western media, the Western mainstream media. What's going to happen with Bakhmut? What's going to happen next? When is this counteroffensive going to happen? There's a lot of questions surrounding what's next for Ukraine. Not to mention, we don't really know where Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, is at any given moment in time. In one moment, he's in Europe, he's in the Netherlands, he's traveling to the UK, hugging Rishi Sunak. He's begging for F-16s over and over and over again to the European Union countries, traveling around. He went to the G7. He was in the Arab League summit for some reason. Now, who knows where he is at this moment? We don't know. Where is Zelensky? We don't know. But I think what's most important about this is we're seeing the ripple effects of what it means for Russia to have won Bakhmut. It means that the tide of the war is turning, and it's not toward Ukraine, as we've been told over and over again for months and months and months that this was going to happen. Now, you hear the collective West saying over and over again, well, what we do from here will depend on the military situation on the ground. That is an admission of Ukraine's troubles, its problems on the battlefield. When you hear the United States say, well, our support is contingent upon how Ukraine does on the battlefield, it means it is not confident in how Ukraine will do on the battlefield. Then you'll hear things like, well, it's okay for Ukraine to attack Russian territory, as they have done in Belgrade with those neo-Nazis and Azov and those folks committing terrorist attacks on the Russian villages there in Belgrade, on Russian territory, right? And then the United States will say, we don't support that. But then inevitably they support it. They'll say, well, we support them taking back Crimea. And there's been so much confusion. But in the aftermath of the loss of Bakhmut by Ukraine, I wanted to focus on two things. Number one, the wonder weapons. What's going to happen with these weapons? Where are we at in terms of what is going to happen with the F-16s and what's going to happen in general with collective West military support to Ukraine? Is it going to be decisive as this counteroffensive launches at some point in the who knows when future? And the second is the diplomatic fallout, the stature of both the collective West project in Ukraine, as well as the prospects for peace. And there are a few developments I wanted to go over that highlight this. But first, let's get to where Bakhmut puts the collective West in terms of military support, strategy, and all of it. And here is Brian Berletic. He's going to talk about where the collective West is at in terms of military support to Ukraine, because Bakhmut is a turning point, not just in, well, Russia has gained a key victory on the battlefront, on the, on this defense line where Ukrainian forces and Russian forces, mainly the Wagner group, are clashing. No, it's not just that. It's that Ukraine is out of time because the collective West doesn't really have another military to spare. They don't have the ability to fortify another military for Ukraine. And Brian Berletic is going to explain why. And there's more support that has come out since he has made this video. And FYI, Brian Berletic will be likely on this channel June 1st, hopefully again for our monthly stream, and if not later in June. So here we go.
Overall, the West is exhausting its land warfare capabilities. Every couple of days or so, we see articles like this. This one was pointed out to me by Mark Sloboda, who I've had on my channel several times. Washington Post, Europe's military industrial capabilities fall short of Ukraine's needs. And this was dated May 19th, 2023. So this is the Washington Post admitting a lot of the things that I and others have been saying for months now. And we've been saying these things because these are obvious things. The Western media, I think, didn't say these things because it wasn't politically expedient. One has to wonder why now it is acceptable to say these things. The article says Western governments, in particular European ones, have failed to act fast enough to turn around their industrial policy to meet Ukraine's growing needs for artillery, ammunition, armored vehicles, and other weaponry, military experts said. Kiev's existing stores of Russian-made equipment are becoming depleted, as are the West's own stockpiles, raising the risk of shortages in supplies for Ukraine by the end of the year, which will hamper Ukraine's ability to launch any further offensive, these experts said. And as I've said, this offensive that they will launch will be their last offensive. There is no more to send to Ukraine for building up another army to launch another major offensive. This was a reality that the Western policymakers and the Western media were going to have to face sooner or later. It is now later. The article goes.
So it is now later. I mean, there's just nothing left. The production of military armaments has been far exceeded in terms of what can be given to Ukraine. That's the point here. The point is that whatever happens in this counteroffensive is likely going to be the last gasp. That's why you hear the Biden administration saying that this will be a frozen conflict potentially soon. And that's mainly because the collective West doesn't really have much left to give Ukraine. And we're going to get into the F-16s and their limitations in a minute, but let's continue.
Goes on and it says, that has led to a growing realization in Western capitals that the piecemeal assistance to Ukraine so far may not be sufficient to allow Kiev to make more than localized breakthroughs along the 900-mile front line where Russia has spent months fortifying its positions. Exactly. You cannot piecemeal send equipment and ammunition to Ukraine in the middle of a war at a pace slower than Russia is taking it off the battlefield.
I mean, this is just basic stuff at this point. And that's what Bakhmut really represents, is this basic fundamental contradiction that the collective West has a certain kind of model. They're not built necessarily to fight a full-scale war, World War I, World War II style war with Russia at this time, because the collective West relies on armaments from military contractors who have a certain production model garnered toward profit. A lot of their profit now comes significantly from just government contracts. There really isn't either the will or the economic interest in producing the equipment necessary to fortify Ukraine. Not to mention that Ukraine, I mean, people have been bringing this up to me, Ukraine doesn't really have the manpower anymore either. They've ground a lot of that down. Much of Ukraine's population isn't even living in Ukraine anymore. That about a third of the population, or a little bit more than that, has left. And a lot of that has been, some of that has been to Russia and neighboring countries. But let's continue.
That is unsustainable. European militaries over the years had not focused on a major war in Europe. That was not core to the planning. And they were not stockpiling ammunition in sufficient numbers for that type of contingency. Once again, exactly. As I have said, for decades now, the U.S. has been fighting small wars around the globe. The U.S. has brought its European allies along with them. They have created an army meant specifically to fight multiple small wars all around the globe. They are not prepared. Their military industrial base is not prepared. Their militaries themselves are not organized and prepared and equipped for a large-scale, intense, and prolonged conflict like what we see taking place in Ukraine right now.
So, and I just want to add to that is because the United States, after the fall of the Soviet Union, declared itself. What did it declare itself? It declared itself the end of history, right? declared itself the top hegemon, that there was no competitor. And when there's no competitor, okay, this is important. When there's no competitor to to overtake you, that there's no rival, there's no threat to your reign of supremacy. Well, what does that mean? It means that you are number one. Why would you stockpile? For what? Right? You're really only building up a military now, and believe me, this military is very costly. Regardless, the US and the EU countries combined spend trillions in military expenditures, but those trillions are not for wars like the one being fought in Ukraine. They weren't for heavy trench warfare, multiple forms of combat kind of warfare. It was all about shock and awe and destroying any alternative that just so happened to be weaker than the United States. The assumption was that all of these countries would be weaker. And now what has happened is Russia has essentially been a match, right? The United States and the collective West has met their match. They cannot shock and awe their way into victory in Ukraine. There is going to be no such victory. And that is where the problem resides. This has been going on now for more than 15 months. And that is a huge problem for the collective West that is not resolved, anywhere near resolved at this moment.
And Russia, on the other hand, is prepared. China also is prepared. They've spent all of their time and energy creating a military purely for defensive purposes, and specifically for a potential conflict over their island province of Taiwan, where the US is attempting to provoke a conflict. The article also talks about the US and EU working on their respective attempts to expand artillery shell production. I've talked about this many times. At the end of these efforts, they hope to be collectively producing 2 million rounds a year. The US about 1 million, Europe about 1 million rounds per year, but that is going to take them years to do. And when they complete this process, that will only equate to about 6,000 rounds per day, and that's if every single one of these shells is sent directly to Ukraine. 6,000 shells a day is what Ukraine is already firing, and it's already several times smaller than what Russia is firing daily.
So again, what this all means, what this all means is that the battlefield situation is a really rough one right now for Ukraine. It's just really incredible to watch the collective West, and you're going to see soon around these F-16s try to maneuver and essentially say many different things at the same time. Okay, many different things at the same time. We're talking about saying that, well, Ukraine's going to win, Ukraine has the upper hand, and then saying, wait, actually, no, they don't have the upper hand. They lost Bakhmut. Now they're saying F-16s are going to turn the tide. Zelensky's going on video saying F-16s are going to turn the tide. Well, the reality is a lot different. You're going to hear that very soon. But let's get back to this video for a little bit longer here.
And then the article talks about Russia, and it says, signs are emerging of a parallel effort in Russia to increase production despite Western sanctions. Data recently published on Russia's Federal Treasury website showed Moscow spent 2 trillion rubles on defense in January and February alone, a 282% increase over the same period in 2021, Reuters reported on Monday. Russia is on course to produce 2.5 million artillery rounds this year, up from 1.7 million before the war. And then they say one of the experts that they've included their comments in this article. Right now, Russia is producing more artillery rounds than the US and Europe collectively will be in, say, 2 or 3 years from now when they finally complete expanding their production. What does that tell you? And where do you think Russia will be in 2 or 3 years from now? How many artillery rounds do you think they'll be producing then? And that's if this 2.5 million this year is actually accurate. I suspect the number is much, much higher, possibly several times higher.
So I'm just going to stop it there because I want to get into the F-16s. But that was Brian Berletic. He frequently comes on the show, just giving the reality of the situation. Ukraine has burned through the ammunition, the artillery, all of the heavy weaponry. You saw what happened to the Patriot missiles, the Kinjal missiles that destroyed the Patriot missile system. We have Bakhmut showing that Russia's military is fortified, it's built up. There's a lot invested in it for a defensive war. And this is the difference. And this is always the difference. Remember, history. Remember history. It's always the difference. Regardless of whether it's Russia with a modern military fortified and built up to defend Russia from NATO encroachment, or whether we're talking about a smaller country like Afghanistan or Korea or Vietnam, which ejected the interventionists and the aggressors, right? US, Japan, whoever we're talking about, right? US, Japan, the collective West, didn't matter. France, didn't matter. They got ejected. And why? Is because there was not just military investment, but popular investment. People supported the efforts to defend their country from foreign intervention, from Western intervention, from US intervention. And that is coupled here. Russia not only has that aspect of it, believe me, the majority of Russians support what's going on in Ukraine because it's existential for them. NATO encroachment means the possible wiping out of any kind of sovereignty and self-determination for the Russian people. That's unacceptable, and including the Russian minorities in the Donbass, and it also includes, or the Russian majority, I should say, in the Donbass, but the Russian ethnic groups in the Donbass. And it also includes the entire region. So this is existential because this kind of conflict so close to Russia means that NATO is indeed threatening Russia. And that has been the narrative that has been turned on its head so many times by the collective West, by the media, by the United States, right? They've all tried to say, this isn't provoked. Russia's doing this unprovoked. Russia is the aggressor here. But we are seeing as this war grinds on that Russia is actually built to defend its territories, to defend its sphere of influence in the region, and that the United States and NATO and the European collective West countries, vassal states, they're not prepared to defend anything because they're the ones on the offensive, and now they're reaching their limits. And so there's been a lot made about F-16s, and I just want to read from a Politico article, one of the more recent ones talking about F-16s. You might have seen the Biden administration during the G7. You might have heard from NATO, Jens Stoltenberg and Josep Borrell of the EU, all talking about green lighting F-16s to Ukraine, the training necessary, as well as the fighter jets themselves. And there's been a lot of confusion about it. On the one hand, Biden has said, well, let the allies, they use this World War speak, and you'll see it here. The allies, right, the so-called collective West countries, the so-called good guys, which are actually the bad guys, they are approving these weapons, and then the U.S. will say, well, we're not going to send them directly, and we're not going to train directly, but, you all over there can do that, and we won't complain about it. And now we're hearing a lot of back and forth, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. There's a lot of back and forth about these F-16s. So the F-16 takeoff, says Politico, will take time. While allies have agreed to train Kiev's pilots, no country is actually ready to donate jets for now. So don't expect to see F-16 fighter jets in Ukrainian skies anytime soon. The allies, aka the collective West and the U.S. and its collective West vassal states, will need some time. Following months of Ukrainian lobbying, the U.S. on Friday greenlit training for Ukrainian pilots on fourth-generation fighter aircraft, raising expectations that a fleet of F-16s would soon be on its way. Yet as of now, some of the leading contenders to donate the American-developed warplanes, including the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark, have only committed to helping train Ukrainian pilots, expressing reluctance to make further promises. Let's make sure we know how to make the most of training activities, said Dutch Foreign Minister Wopke Hoekstra told reporters in Brussels on Monday. What the future then holds for us, he says, remains to be seen. Some, like Belgium, have even directly said they don't have F-16s to spare. So already the collective West is walking back their promises. Okay, that's how that's where they're at. They're walking things back. So the pattern, however, is one that is played out over and over as Western allies gradually escalate the weaponry they are shuttling to Ukraine. At first, there's hesitation, then one of the major powers, often the US, takes a first step, followed by a coalition of European nations that jump roughly together. So they're literally saying, yeah, when the US says jump, the Europe in the collective West says how high. This is kind of indicative of how the U.S. has provided assistance at every step of the war in Ukraine, said Seth Jones, director of the International Security Program at the CSIS, Center for International and Strategic Studies, aka a military industrial complex think tank. For now, no one is ready to send the first jet, and that could easily change in time. The delivery of F-16s will indeed make a difference months away from now, said Ben Hodges, former U.S. Army commander in Europe. So where are the jets now? But before we get there, I mean, just let that sink in a bit, okay? What this means is that the F-16s, there's no date on these. And a lot of European countries are saying, we'll train the pilots and we'll see where it goes. Europe is really looking at the United States and saying, Daddy, please just give us the signal. And I'm not going to sit here and say F-16s are not going to make it to Ukraine, that they won't be sent. I think that, in the past, I was wrong before. I didn't think that these heavy armored vehicles, the M1 Abrams and all of that were going to make it to Ukraine, but they did, or at least they were pledged. I don't know if we've seen any on the battlefield. I'm not the battlefield expert, but will we see an F-16 on the battlefield in Ukraine fighting Russian, conflicting with Russia's air defenses and Russian fighter jets? I'm skeptical about that. And the reason is the timeline, right? How many months has it been since Ukraine was pledged a lot of these heavy armored vehicles, and how many of them were actually deployed? We know the Patriot system was taken down by Russia, and that was months after it was pledged, which means that it took a long time and to even just get those out and operable. So what's to say the outcome won't be any different? Who's to say that Russia just won't destroy these weapons once they make their way to the battlefield? So where are the jets now? The slow decision making is linked to both political and technical considerations. Few countries have an F-16 surplus, and the modern machines require significant training and logistics. The U.S. also has to authorize other countries to re-export the plane. Yuri Sakin, advisor Minister of Defense Oleksiy Reznikov, an advisor to Ukrainian Minister of Defense Oleksiy Reznikov, said that the Netherlands are in a position to be the first country to give us fighter jets. And so that's probably why we had Zelensky in the Netherlands several weeks ago, begging and kissing the feet of Netherlands officials. So Dutch officials. The Netherlands currently have 24 F-16s in use, which are operationally deployable and will remain in use until mid-2024, a spokesperson for the Dutch Defense Ministry said. After that, they are available for another destination, such as sale. The Netherlands has also additional 18 F-16s, which are no longer used operationally and can also be given a different destination. 12 of these 18 were originally slated to be transferred to a private company, but the transfer had been delayed. Predictably, the U.S., where the F-16 was invented, maintains its own massive fleet. Yet asked Monday if there was any chance the U.S. will provide its own planes, Frank Kendall, U.S. Air Force Secretary, told reporters, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a number of possibilities. The U.K., meanwhile, has been an aggressive advocate of creating a Western coalition for jets, but the country itself lacks any F-16s to donate. So it's really easy, right? Really, really easy to say, send all the F-16s when you don't have any. But these countries in the collective West, including the United States, are hedging their bets. Is this worth it? How about now? I think what's happening is that Ukraine's battlefield situation is not favorable. So just sending out weaponry, even weaponry that's old, they say F-16s are modern. I don't think these F-16s are going to, you saw in this article, they're talking about maybe they're operational, maybe not, so many times. I don't know how good, what good these jets will do on the battlefield. But I think the point is that there's a lot of hedging of bets. Is this the right thing to do? How does it look? to have all of our weaponry destroyed by Russia. I do think that is a consideration, and that's why they're waiting on this counteroffensive. Can Ukraine slaughter themselves enough to impress their benefactors, their paymasters, so to speak? Several other capitals have also signaled they are also willing to go as far as training. In addition to Belgium, Polish president Ardej Duda, of course, this guy, said last week that Warsaw will not give away its more modern jets. The country maintains 48 F-16s after already donating Soviet MiG-29s. So how long will this take? How long will all of this take? Washington has indicated that while it now supports Ukraine getting access to F-16s, the decision is designed to help Kiev in the longer term and won't have any immediate impact on the battlefield. It will take several months at best to have that capability, and there are a lot of details that are going to have to be sorted out. It will give the Ukrainians an incremental capability that they don't have right now, but it's not going to be a dramatic game changer. You hear that? Not going to be a dramatic game changer. That is one of the top U.S. Army commanders of the U.S. Air Force commanders. That is what they're saying. That's what the United States is saying. It's not going to change the outcome on the battlefield. It's not going to be a dramatic game changer, which is why there's hesitation. So Olaf Scholz, a spokesperson for the German chancellor, whose country doesn't have F-16, said on Monday that Berlin and Washington were in close coordination on the plans, but stressed that the program takes several months or even years, depending on the previous experience of the pilots. Do we have to go on? I don't have to go on. This is a long article. That's the point. The point is, no matter who's saying it, CSIS, no matter who's saying it, the top U.S. Air Force commander, Mr. Kendall, no matter who is saying this, to all of you watching this, the message is the same. The message is that the battlefield situation is not favorable, and Ukraine will have to wait months, if not years, for this strategy to be effective. Months, if not years. Okay. So, does Ukraine have months, if not years, in this conflict? I don't think so. I think Russia is indeed making progress and has a lot left in the tank. Not only does it have a lot left in the tank, but it has a lot left in manpower, let alone whatever weaponry it has and is building up. You heard Brian Berletic. He said Russia has spent lots of money building this army of defense. And they also have hundreds of thousands, right? I think it's somewhere between 300,000 troops in a partial mobilization ready to go. Only some of those were deployed. So Russia has many to go, has a lot of forces it can send out there. Wagner Group is just the tip of the iceberg. So where does this leave Ukraine? It leaves Ukraine still in a very precarious position. But a lot of this is narrative management. And you see it in the collectivists. Oh, Bakhmut, it's not that important. Oh, Ukraine might have lost, but oh no, they're still fighting. Oh, well, Ukraine doesn't acknowledge it. Ukraine striking Russian territory. Ukraine, Belgrade, neo-Nazis. You just see, they're trying to take your mind all over the place. But where we should be focusing is on what is the real situation for Ukraine? What are the prospects here for any kind of victory? Because that's all we've been hearing. And we should focus on this because what it tells us when we do is when we actually look at the facts are that Russia has the advantage. Russia is winning. Russia is continuing to make progress, and Bakhmut is a significant victory. It's not over. No one said that fighting is going to end. NATO and the collective West, they're committed to keeping this conflict going as long as possible, literally to the last Ukrainian. This is a fact. They will annihilate any Ukrainian willing to fight Russia for their war. This is a war of attrition. They weren't prepared for it. The collective West was never prepared for this war of attrition. And now they are letting Ukraine pay for it. Because let's be honest, as much as the externalities of sanctions, right? The impact of sanctions, the impact of this conflict on the world situation, economically, militarily, etc. As much as it's been devastating, much of the damage, much of the harm that is being done to Ukraine. And Ukraine is the most suffering is happening there because Russia is not suffering as much as Ukraine is. Ukraine's economy has been gutted. Ukraine's negative growth is by far worse than anything Russia has experienced because of this conflict. Its economy is contracted by a third. It is now in crippling debt to Western financial institutions, even more than it was prior to the conflict. Russia's currency stabilized. Russia's economy has stabilized. Russia is set to grow, even if it is at a slower pace than maybe that they would like. But Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world by the biggest economies in the world, right? By the United States, by the EU countries. And yet it is much more stable. So who is winning actually here? And what is the trajectory of this conflict? Well, the trajectory is it's probably going to last a long time, but the trajectory of where the conflict is going, what is on the horizon, it is Russia meeting its goals. Everything that it's doing, from Bakhmut to whatever's happening on the defense line to its missile strikes, its drone strikes, all of it is about getting rid of Ukraine's military, demilitarizing, getting rid of those NAZI pests in Belgrade, right? Cleaning house, right? A clean sweep of these forces that are so aligned with NATO that they're willing to destroy whatever Ukraine was supposed to be, right? Ukraine was supposed to be this post-Soviet, independent, quote unquote, really impoverished, kind of subordinate state to the collective West. Well, it's even destroying that because it can't even maintain any stability under the conditions that it is under at the moment. So Bakhmut is significant. These F-16s are not going to change anything on the battlefield. Who knows when we'll even see one? We're probably all going to be quite old by then. But the point is a lot is going to happen in between this pledge for F-16s, this pledge to escalate a counteroffensive, and when we actually see these weapons on the battlefield. And a lot did happen when that Patriot system was struck down by Russian missiles. A lot had already happened, right? A lot had already happened. Bakhmut was basically taken to its conclusion by then, and Russia had already gone through its partial mobilization. Russia had defeated sanctions. Russia had done a lot to get to the point where it is now. And so nothing that the collective West can do at this moment will change the calculations on the battlefield and where this is going. And that's really the most important takeaway here.